who were bookmakers, and there was gambling, and there was crap games on the street, and there were private illegal card games in various parts of the city. But I grew up with that right from the beginning, so I thought it was like that no matter where you went. And I never knew why until later that nobody ever gave me any trouble in the neighborhood. He just told everybody that they shouldn't mess around with me, and that's the way it was. But I did get to, even after I'd become successful. Now, you know, I'm sure that everybody realizes that, even the Copacabana.
Frankie Valli's voice is famous for soaring high above the music, but the story beneath that voice is something he rarely talks about. When people think of Frankie, they think of the Four Seasons, the falsetto, the Broadway musical, the legend. But the truth is that before the fame, before the hits, and long before the spotlight, Frankie Valli was growing up in a neighborhood where the mob wasn't some distant rumor whispered in alleyways. The mob was the environment. It was the background noise of everyday life. He wasn't born into that world. He was simply born near it. Newark, New Jersey, mid-20th century, an Italian-American community where half the people were first-generation immigrants, and the other half were figuring out how to survive in a country that wasn't always kind to newcomers.
Was a Frank Costello venture.
Don Rickles, whom I interviewed recently, told me the story that when he first went to the Copacabana, that the person who was running the place didn't like him. But somebody from, quote, the management, from the wise guys, said to the manager, I like him, and from that moment on, Don Rickles said he played the Copacabana regularly.
Right.
He pointed out the same thing happened to him in Las Vegas. He said he knew mob people. He wasn't in the mob, but he knew mob people. And he laid out pretty much what you have, that they liked him, so they protected him. That was pretty much the case with yourself, was it not?
Now, I had exactly the same kind of experiences.
And in the middle of all that, kids like Frankie grew up thinking that bookmakers on the corner and illegal card games in the back of local bars were normal. Not frightening, not glamorous, just there. He said he thought the whole world worked like that. If you wanted to place a bet, you knew exactly which doorway to knock on. If you wanted to watch a dice game, you didn't have to look far. The mob wasn't a shadowy conspiracy. It was just the older guys sitting outside, smoking, watching the block, and behind the doors of almost every club or bar where young musicians were trying to get their start. Those were mob-owned too. When Frankie finally began building a career in music, he discovered that the industry and the underworld shared a lot of hallways. The saloons he sang in, the clubs that booked him, the venues with real money behind them, many of them were run by the same men he'd grown up around. And the thing is, he never had a single problem with them, not one. He always said it might have been because he knew everybody, or because they already knew him. In neighborhoods like that, familiarity was protection. But Frankie's real protection came from one person in particular, a man he openly calls a captain in the Genovese crime family. His name was Gyp DeCarlo, and Frankie describes him as like a father, not a business partner, not a handler, a father figure. Frankie said he didn't even know what DeCarlo actually did until years later. He thought Gyp was involved in gambling, and left it at that. The truth was far bigger, but Gyp never asked Frankie for money, never demanded favors, never tried to pull him into the darker side of anything. In fact, he did the opposite. DeCarlo made sure nobody in Newark laid a finger on Frankie. Nobody touched him, nobody threatened him, nobody tried to pull him into trouble. Because when Gyp told the neighborhood to leave someone alone, the neighborhood listened. Frankie eventually became a star, and even then, the mob world and the entertainment world kept crossing paths. He mentions the Copacabana, one of the most famous clubs in America, the crown jewel of New York nightlife, and reminds people that it was a Frank Costello venture. If you were an entertainer in that era, the mob wasn't some spooky subplot. It was the silent power behind the curtain. Even Don Rickles once told the same story. A manager didn't like him, but one remark from the wise guys changed his fate overnight.
And I mean, there were many times I was visited by the FBI and they wanted to know why. I was in this restaurant sitting down having a drink with John Gotti. Well, I walked in a restaurant and he saw me, he said, hey, how you doing? He said, come on over and have a drink. And the agent at the time said to me, well, do you know who he is and what he does? I said, I don't know anything except what I read, and he never did anything to me. And he offered to buy me a drink. I said, what do you want me to do? I said, well, everybody that wants to buy me a drink, should I ask them what they do for a living? I said, certainly you do realize that I'm a performer. That's what I do. I said, I pay my taxes. I said, do you think these guys call me up and say, come over, we want to tell you what we're doing next week? So he laughed about it, and he said, well, he said, you know, I'm just doing my job. He said, by the way, he said, will you sign this thing for my kid?
If you had not become a singer, and there were any number of places along the way up in which you could have gone the other way, what do you think would have become of you?
Sometimes it scares me to think about what would have become.
Suddenly he was a regular. Frankie's experience mirrored that. If they liked you, you were protected. If they didn't, well, you just hoped that they didn't notice you. But the FBI noticed Frankie. He remembers agents showing up, asking why he was seen having a drink in a restaurant with John Gotti. Frankie laughed at the idea. He said he walked in, Gotti recognized him, called him over, and bought him a drink. That was it. No secret meetings, no whispered deals, just two men in a bar, one offering the other a drink. But the agents pressed him. Do you know who he is? Do you know what he does? Frankie told them the truth. I only know what I read. These guys don't invite me to strategy meetings. I'm a performer. I pay my taxes. And if someone offers to buy me a drink, I'm not asking for their resume. The agent eventually laughed and asked for an autograph for his son, and that was that. But what if Frankie hadn't become a singer? That question hits him hard, because he admits that in the neighborhood he grew up in, a lot of guys didn't stay on the right side of the line. He remembers friends found in the trunks of cars. Others who got mobbed up and disappeared. Others who were swallowed by prison time. Frankie says he had a brief encounter with the wrong path, and it terrified him. He was arrested young for a minor crime, and his parents came to get him. When he saw his father cry, everything inside him changed. That moment, he says, probably saved his life. It wasn't about fear of the law. It was fear of becoming someone who made his father ashamed. Frankie realized he didn't want to be controlled. He'd seen tough men reduced to frightened boys when someone with real power scolded them. He didn't want that life, not for a minute. But even after he escaped that world, life wasn't done testing him. Frankie endured something no parent should ever experience, the loss of two of his children within 6 months. The kind of pain that doesn't just break you, it hollow you out. He said he didn't know how he survived it. He started drinking, alone, during the day, because grief like that burns holes in a person. He wasn't trying to numb the pain, he was trying to outrun it. His divorce was already underway, but losing 2 children while a marriage was collapsing around him felt like being hit from every side at once. He said he didn't care about anything for a while. He didn't care about music, about work, about living clean, but something in him, the same instinct that made him vow to straighten up after disappointing his father, pulled him back to the surface. He met someone new, fell in love again, found a different path. When she became pregnant, Frankie quit everything. Drinking, smoking, substances, all of it. Because the one thing he knew for certain was that he never wanted his child to grow up watching him fall apart. Frankie Valli never hid from his upbringing. He never pretended he wasn't surrounded by the mob. He never denied knowing the men who shaped that world, but involvement is a different story. Frankie didn't work for them. He wasn't part of them. He never took orders. He never ran their business. He simply grew up near them, performed in their clubs, talked to them when he walked past their tables, and lived in a neighborhood where the lines between criminal and citizen were blurry, but never invisible. What he did confirm, without hesitation, is that the mob liked him, protected him, looked out for him. And in neighborhoods like Newark in that era, that alone could shape your entire life. But the choices, the real choices, were always his. Frankie Valli survived the environment, avoided the traps, walked around the danger, climbed out of tragedy, and found his way back to himself. And in the end, that might be the most remarkable thing about his story.